Welcome to Charts Today. My name is David Linton, and today's edition for Monday, the 17th of December, comes to you from London. And we start by looking at the dollar. Dollar actually looking bullish still, creeping just out of the cloud here. So looking on this weekly chart, the long-term chart, for the first time in 2 years, the lagging line now poking itself above the cloud. So that's long-term bullish. Lots of short-term targets. If you look at the chart here, the 60-minute chart, when you see a multiple number of targets like this, it really does suggest we're going higher. This target given way back in April this year on the short-term chart met. When we see targets given and met like that, that's bullish confirmation. So long-term bullish, medium-term bullish, short-term bullish as well. Looking at the euro dollar, euro looking weak against that strong dollar, and some very big downside targets here still to worry about. Japanese yen, we're seeing dollar looking bullish here. If we do see signs of the trend waning, it will show up on the yen chart normally first, so keep an eye on that. Sterling is looking weak against the dollar still. We're neutral on that short-term chart, but we do have quite a lot of downside targets here, so still looks pretty bad for sterling. Against the euro, sterling also looking weak on the medium and long-term charts. Against the Swiss franc, looking weaker, and against the Aussie dollar, actually looking a little bit stronger against a weaker Aussie dollar. Bitcoin is actually up 1.4% this morning, but still looking pretty bearish all round. We've still got big downside targets here on Bitcoin, so still very worrying. The US stock market closed on Friday lower, quite a lot lower, so ended a bad week. We see the S&P closing. The lagging line gives you that just a clarity on the close. We see that closing level at the lowest really we've seen now for since the beginning of the year. So looking pretty bearish. Downside target still here, so that is a worry. Looking at the Nasdaq 100, we were lower as well. The Dow was down 2% as well. So a pretty bad week for the markets. Seeing the Russell 2000 was also lower as well. The the futures this morning little changed on the S&P, and the Nasdaq is up slightly, 0.2% higher. The European markets lower this morning. We're seeing FTSE down 2.2%, sorry, 0.22%, and mid caps in the UK lower with more downside targets. And we look at the DAX just slightly down this morning, but not massively, and the CAC Current down just under 1/3%, so still looking pretty bearish on all three time frames. Japan was up about 1/4%. Hong Kong was flat. China very slightly up, but still a worry on these charts. The Sensex was looking stronger in India, up 0.65%. That's taking that short-term bullish. And if you look at the Australian market, it was up 1%. So quite a recovery there. Brent crude is down very slightly. WTI is actually up very slightly, but still looking pretty bearish here. Really big support level here being tested on that long-term chart. US nat gas falling back very sharply, back to $3.66, was $1 higher only a few weeks ago. So it's really giving up a lot of the gains that we saw in November. Looking at gold, gold sitting at 1238, short-term bearish but medium-term bullish, so still has some work to do. These upside targets still very much in train. Silver, similar picture of course. US 10-year yields sitting at 2.88%, so all talk of the Fed raising rates has gone off the agenda for the moment, and German bonds higher on those lower yields, so looking good. All of this data coming from Thomson Reuters Icon. If you're a private user, that's Metastock Zenith, so very the same system effectively. Moving to looking at stocks themselves, this data is coming from Yahoo Finance, and we see here global markets. Asia was fairly much up. We're seeing Europe mostly down this morning, and we're waiting for that US Open. The Nasdaq, we had some pretty big falls on Friday. Amazon was down 4%, Apple were down 3%. So these bellwethers are really hurting things. Google was down 2%, and if you look at Facebook, they were down not as much, but they've fallen a lot of late, of course. And then we had Netflix were also down 3%. Microsoft down 3%. So some really big falls there on Friday. And Tesla actually down 3%. So across the board, we saw quite a lot of falls. Looking at Australia overnight, Australia was up. Mineral resources were up 10%. The Aussie market was up 1%. So we are seeing quite good performances here. Focus Group up 5%. Looking at the other end of the scale, Australia pharmaceutical industries were down 7%, so not all up. And we're seeing actually healthcare stocks in Oz were suffering. China, mixed picture here. A lot of stocks up, and we saw the market was flat. Not as many stocks down, but the ones that were down quite significantly down. Hong Kong mixed as well. The Nifty 50 in India, we saw fewer stocks down. These prices coming in live from Yahoo Finance, and then Tata Motors, they're up 4.5%. Looking at Japan, we saw more stocks up and down as well. And then moving to the FTSE 100 index, we see a lot of red on the screen this morning. Next, retail has really been hit. Next down 3.7%. Marks and Spencer's down 3.6%. Associated British Foods, which is Primark, which has Primark, of course, in its stable of holdings, down 2.6%. Ocado, really seeing some quite big ones. Kingfisher, B&Q. So a lot of retailers in these fallers today, all looking pretty bearish on the charts. Looking at the upside, some of the resource stocks, Rio Tinto, Glencore. So we are seeing some performances there bucking the trend. The FTSE 250, much the same picture. JD Sports down 4%. Dixon's Carphone, Sports Direct. We're seeing a lot of retailers being really badly hit. Thomas Cook down another 4.8%, so they're really struggling. In Europe, across the board here, we've got Zalando, Germany's down 14%. That's looking really worrying. Paris in Genco down 6%. So we are still seeing some pretty big falls. And then we've got GAM holdings there up 3%, bucking the trend. But overall, retail has been really badly hit today. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.